Hi, this is Zekin, here to give a quick overview of the craft that I created for the Newbie Rumble 2 tournament hosted by Lukaya. I had a lot of fun participating in the tournament, and I learned really a lot of stuff about the game in designing my craft, and figured some people might be curious about how I put it together and why I made some decisions and such, so maybe you'll learn something too. So this is Exsanguination, a melee ramming craft designed to tear its enemies to shreds, mostly with its large frontal melee weapon that spins around when it gets in melee range, but it has a lot of other tertiary weapons and systems. So I'll get started with its defenses. Most of the armor is concentrated on the front, with a lot of heavy armor to help it charge and get to its enemies without taking too much damage. I figured that the majority of the punishment will be focused on the front and the top, but hopefully not the sides. The side armor is simply just 2 layers of metal or alloy. There's some spaced armor on the front and the top. You can see it there. The top half of my craft is made of mostly alloy, while the bottom half is metal. Since the craft is kind of tall and narrow, the idea is that the bottom half is heavier than the top. It should automatically try to self-right itself if it falls onto its side, and hopefully won't get stuck upside down. I ended up replacing some of the armor with wood. So you might notice here and some in here. This was mostly just due to trying to stay under the 150,000 budget. I only put it in places that I hope would matter the least, and I had to keep in mind the buoyancy as well, so hopefully it wouldn't mess with that too much, but I think it turned out okay. The next in its defensive arsenal is these LAM systems, so I've got 4 LAMS nodes, which has a fairly beefy LAM system, so it doesn't recharge very quickly, but it's very strong, so it does a lot of damage. So it'll at least protect from a couple of like cram shots or some large missiles or things like that. It's only set to target large diameter shells and sets at 200 meters. The idea being that hopefully anything smaller than that will get shrugged off by the armor, which is, you probably notice it's all sloped armor. The shields, nothing much to say really there. It's just 4 shield nodes that I just slammed on. You can see them here. They don't do a whole lot, but against small caliber fire with a high RPM, they're quite good. And even against the higher caliber stuff, they still shrugged off a shot or 2 here, which sort of makes them worth it considering they're quite cheap. And they've got the munitions warning system up here. In retrospect, I probably should have had a lot more munition warners on the outsides of my craft or somewhere, since they tended to get blown off quite quickly early on, and once it got blown off, then the LAM system was pretty useless. Didn't do a whole lot. Another defensive system is the torpedo interceptors. So these worked out really great. I pretty much didn't have any issues with torpedoes, which is really good. So these are like really strong. They worked out pretty well. That pretty much covers it for defensive stuff, I think. So for detection, because it's a melee craft, really doesn't need very much detection at all. You notice there's pretty much nothing on the top half. Literally the only detection that I have is this active sonar and passive sonar, since it doesn't need to know exactly where the enemy craft is, it just has to know the general direction to drive in. And same with the missiles. The missiles are pretty much self-guiding, so outside of the 1 turn they use, don't really need to know anything else, because it'll turn in the direction of the enemy and just lock on by all on its own. And I believe auto detection was set higher than normal as well, so it was another reason why I didn't really need very much detection. So the next thing I'm going to talk about is propulsion. So on the back I've got 2 beefy steam propellers. That's pretty much what made my ship go, go, go. as fast as I could make it go pretty much, while still staying within the rules. You notice I've got some large propellers as well here. These are pretty much just to push my ship back into the water, so they're a little bit high on the ship. I found in testing that my ship would tend to sort of skim over the waves or like go up like a Harley Davidson like on its back and like skim over the waves, which is against the tournament rules. So these ones help keep it in the water, but still go pretty quickly. I think somewhere between 30 and 40 meters a second, roughly, I think. On the sides, I've got the regular turners. Could have put these behind vents, I've since learned, which probably would have given it a bit more protection and maybe looked a bit nicer too. So I've got 6 on each side to try and help it turn quick. You'd think it would turn super quick with those on there, but it didn't really turn that fast, which is not great, but I don't know, turned fast enough, I guess. On the bottom, I've just got some pitch ones and some roll ones, pretty standard, really. More pitches. And finally, probably one of the most important propulsion controls are I got like an absolute ton of these hydrofoils on the inside. They're all set to stay at 45 degrees. I found it in my testing whenever I would attach myself to an enemy craft with harpoons. Sometimes I get stuck underneath the enemy, and then it'd disqualify me for being too low in the water, or my ship would turn submarine and just dive into the water. So as long as these things survive and the craft is moving forward, it's always going to like basically push itself out of the water, even if it's got enemies attached to it. Um, these hydrofoils are like really strong, so it'll like push itself out of the water. All right, and then onto the really juicy stuff, the offensive part of the ship. So to start with, we've got this big ass frontal melee weapon, which is the craft's primary weapon, I guess. It's mounted on a 5x5 turret and consists of like a ton of heavy armor on the outside, a bit of spaced armor, and a crap load of rams on this side. The turret is set to idle at 180 degrees, um, so that basically the armor's facing the outside rather than the rams, so that obviously they don't get blown off before it makes it to the enemy. Um, and it's basically this. It's controlled by. It's got so this craft's got 2 AIs. It's got one separate AI called Pack. Should probably be called Melee now, but I was too lazy to rename it. That basically this weapon system, if I try to turn it on, it turns off straight away because it's controlled by an ACB, so that it only gets turned on if the enemy is within 200 meters. So um, once it gets turned on, then this turret becomes active, and then it'll basically try and turn to face the enemy. I've also got a set of ACBs inside the craft, which modify some of these settings as well. So um, basically, if there's an enemy within 200 meters, it's going to set the turret's idle back to 0 so that the turret will spin around to face them. Once it's within 200 meters, it also activates all the spin blocks on the craft as well. So you would have noticed all these saw blade type weapons are all controlled by spin blocks, so they'll start spinning once it gets close enough. No real reason to not have them spinning all the time, but I just figured it was like cooler to sort of steal the spin blades start up once it gets close to the enemy. So you might have noticed that although it's controlled by this weapons controller here, which is the pack mainframe, this thing's pretty commonly gets blown off. It's like encased in heavy armor, but even so, somehow the shots still make it through. So to counter that, I had another like a set of ACBs inside the craft. Basically, that in the case that that does get blown off, and it did happen a few times, basically I've got like 3 ACBs that will periodically activate every couple of seconds and change the turret's idle azimuth. So it'll periodically change the turret's idle from -90 degrees to 0 to 90 degrees, which basically means it's going to make it sort of spin in a bit of an arc. And this sort of just helps it. So if it just stays absolutely stationarily still, it doesn't really chew off blocks nearly as well. So if it's spinning around, it tends to do a lot more. And yeah, that's like the craft's main weapon. Then we got the harpoons, which are sitting in here, controlled by some ACBs so that they'll only fire when it's within 1,000 meters. This is because the cable drums don't reach any further than that, so there's not a whole lot of point firing them early, I don't think. If I was good to go back and improve things, I'd probably consider switching to small missiles, since there's not really a whole lot of reason to have these be medium missiles when you know, small missiles achieve the same thing. They're cheaper, they fire faster, and so on. Probably would have been a better idea for these to be smalls, but live and learn. Next we've got some small missiles on the top. So these aren't anything special really. The rationale behind this being that I want to try to exhaust the enemy's ability to deal with missiles. So if they've got a LAM system or some interceptors, this will cause them to fire them all or waste all their LAM's batteries trying to deal with the small missiles and try to allow my harpoon missiles to sneak in and make a hit. They're all EMP frags, so if the missiles do end up getting through, I'm hoping that the EMP might blow off some of the detection systems to make my craft harder to target or something like that. They were moderately effective, I'd say. They didn't do a whole lot of damage, but they were, I think, mostly as a distraction. They don't cost a whole lot. Similarly, I've got some torpedoes on the bottom. The idea being that, if the enemy's AI is set to maintain a certain distance, when it turns around to run away, when they start getting too close, these torpedoes should attack the propulsion and hopefully slow them down. In practice, I don't think they did a whole lot outside of looking cool. Again, if I were to do some redesigning, I might switch them out for medium torpedoes instead, just so they pack more of a punch. Then we've got all the saw blades mounted all over the place. So I've got some there, and some there, and there, and there. I found that when I was testing my crafts, it had a tendency to sort of hug the enemy to its sides, or to get stuck on top or stuck underneath. So the reason for all of these is just so that no matter what side of the vehicle is touching the enemy, hopefully it's still going to be chewing out those blocks and putting out damage and just damaging the enemy crafts and sawing through it in general. Finally, the I guess last weapon system to talk about is this particle cannon. So the reason for these is mostly just because I had a bunch of materials left over, and I had like this area in my ship was pretty much just like an empty space. And I figured, why not throw in some broadsiding pack weapons? These are like pretty super deadly. They do something in the area of 400,000 damage per hit, but they didn't see a whole lot of action during the tournament. Packs are pretty fragile, so they tend to get blown off. These packs aren't controlled by AI at all. Instead, they're controlled by some ACBs, which I've got sort of nestled away in here. And basically the way they're set is so that if it detects an object within 5 to 50 meters, so basically something out here, it'll fire them. And one thing I didn't really know at the time was that any blocks that fall off my ship or an enemy ship, they're detected by the ACB. So even if it's just like flotsam that's like floating around in the water, it'll cause the pack to fire. So you probably might have seen some of the battles just randomly firing the packs for no discernible reason. When they did hit though, they're like pretty super devastating. They like take out huge chunks of the enemy. Overall, they didn't work out that well. I'd probably, if I wanted a super optimized craft, I'd probably replace them maybe with some large torpedoes or something like that, or maybe experiment with some melee packs or something like that. But That is kind of a fun to have addition, I think. I think that pretty much covers just about everything about my ship. And yeah, I hope you learnt something, and good battles to everyone that I fought against. Thanks.